Okay, so in this one, what we're doing is we're going over the objections to Kant's ethical theory. And since this is the first philosophy ethics video, what you're going to see is that in terms of ethical theory, right, let me share my screen. What we do is we take a look. There's going to be no philosophy theory that actually offers us an objection-free philosophy. That's not going to happen. So what you're going to see is what we do is we test out theories by raising objections to them, and we see if those objections are so seriously devastating to the overall rational and logical character of the moral theory in question that do we say this is a bad theory, not a bad theory. Of course, I also teach courses where we learn about Kant, like in media ethics, where perhaps this isn't as important as just getting right what the moral principles are, but it's still important to see. So the first objection is, and Kant really thought that the nature of the universe was really rational, and that when we give ourselves reasons for acting, we're doing something um, very otherworldly. Like we weren't like other objects. Like human beings were. Uh, in some ways, he referred to this as transcendental, right? We surpass the conditions of nature, of cause and effect. Like we're self-causing. We give ourselves reasons for acting, and because we have this ability to self-legislate and give ourselves our own reasons for acting, that perhaps maybe there was a shape or character to this self-reason giving capacity that we had, that if he could determine what the rules of that underlying human rationality were, he could discover what the rational character of morality might be, right? So when we take a look at the categorical imperative called the principle of universalizability, which, just to remind you, uh, on the screen right here is these two parts, right? That it's the type of reason that everyone could do, and that the reasons are thought out enough that they set out what we're going to do, which is the goal, and why we're going to do it. So it's goal plus justification, that that really planned out reason for acting. And then we ask ourselves, well, what would happen in our imaginations if everyone acted on this reason itself, right? And that's what we're doing. Well, the first objection is usually, it's called the amoralist challenge, right? A is a privative, like atheist is like someone who doesn't believe in God, and amoralist is someone who doesn't believe in morality at all, right? So an amoralist is not even interested in doing the right or wrong thing, though they accept that there are such things as right or wrong actions. So an amoralist is someone who just doesn't care about doing the moral thing, even though they know that there are standards of fixed morality. So the amoralist is not a skeptic of morality. They're just not interested in being moral people. And so here would kind of be the argument, right? So we would have premise one: people have a reason to do something only if doing it will get them what they care about, right? So it's some sort of selfish human nature premise for the first one. Premise two: doing their moral duty sometimes fails to get people what they care about. And it is true. Like when some people do their duty, right? Like, a student says, "Can you grade this paper or give me feedback?" And I would much rather be playing video games than video conferencing with a student, but I made a promise, right? And so doing the moral thing isn't getting me what I want. I just want to play on my Oculus and play a first person shooter or something like that, right? Video game. But no, right? I have to grade this paper. I made a promise. Therefore, people sometimes lack any reason to do their duty. Maybe that's true. Premise four: if people lack any reason to do their moral duty, then violating the moral duty can be perfectly rational. Therefore, it can be perfectly rational for people to violate their moral duty. Now, this argument is only acceptable if premise one is right, that all we care about is what moral reasoning is. In other words, the argument from amoralism seems to be committed at least to the fact that there are no such things as categorical imperatives whatsoever, but there are only hypothetical imperatives, right? So instead, all our moral duties, but here's the Kantian response to the amoralist challenge. All our duties are categorical imperatives. When we act irrationally, we're acting immorally, and when we're acting morally, we are acting rationally. So the pushback against this argument is Kant's identification with doing the moral thing with a common rational capacity. In fact, they're equated together. You could say, right, and just acting rationally equals, oh, I don't know what's going on there, acting morally. Like those two things actually fit together. So the argument for irrationality of immorality, which challenges the amoralist argument. So we would come back and there would be a Kantian defense, right? And so premise one, if you're rational, then you are consistent, like you're acting on reasons, right? And you're not being inconsistent. Remember, the morality as fairness requires that we have consistency in terms of our actions, right? So if someone is constantly doing one thing and saying another, they're not being consistent up to any moral standard, right? And if you're consistent with what you say and do, then you obey the principle of universalizability, right? So if rational is acting consistently, and if you are consistent, then you obey the principle of universalizability. Thus, if you obey the principle of universalizability, then you act morally. Therefore, if you're rational, then you're acting morally. And therefore, if you act immorally, then you're acting irrationally. So Kant must defend the principle of universalizability against all challenges since so much of his view depends upon it. And, it's kind of the foundation. It's the first, and even in the book that Kant introduces this is the first formulation, and this is his first foray into building up his moral system, right? Objection. So another objection, the principle of universalizability fails in the case of fanatics because fanatics can be consistent in the relevant sense if everybody else were to adopt their ends. So this is kind of an interesting objection, and it's not so easy for Kant to evade. And this is maybe the stronger objection. I guess it would be objection 2, considering that we did the immoralist challenge, right? So and this is from the book. It's called The Case of the Lawn Fanatic. Suppose that someone wants nothing more than to have a picture-perfect lawn. His basic maxim is to do whatever it takes to preserve the beauty of his grass. That would be strange, but that's no strike against his plans. The real thorn in this guy's side is the mail carrier, who always trots across the lovely yard on his way to delivering the mail. He has been warned repeatedly to use the sidewalk, but he never listens. So the homeowner decides to take matter into his own hands, and the next time the mail carrier walks across the lawn, the homeowner pulls out a gun and shoots him. Right? This is literally, this is an example. It's kind of funny. It's like, get off my lawn, right? That's clearly the wrong thing to do, but the homeowner's maxim is universalizable. It tells him to take whatever steps are necessary, including killing, in order to preserve the beauty of his lawn. What if everyone were to act on this maxim, and could the homeowner's goal be met? Undoubtedly. Right? So I don't really know what to say about this one. Except, the rejoinder will be, and it'll be clear in the next video or the next lecture, that if we take the principle of universalizability and separate it apart from the principle of humanity, there is no constraint, and it would be possible to universalize any sort of fanatic agenda because you can rationalize, I guess you could say, as long as your ends are consistent, theoretically, right? But what would really defeat the case of the lawn fanatic is if we charitably presented Kant's system with both the standard of fairness that is the first categorical imperative, and then the principle of humanity, which would be the second. Now, of course, in the order of making these videos, this point is very clear to me. It's not very clear to you, so I will return to this point later on. So objection 3, the principle of universalizability demands we always allow our principles, we follow our principles and so demonstrate integrity in our moral dealing with others. And yet integrity is only worthy of admiration if we can be flexible in understanding that too much rigidity and lack of ability to compromise is the problem with terrorists and fanatics. So we want the Nazi commandant to think in more flexible terms, not less flexible terms, right? We want, you know, we wish maybe that the slave owner was not so rigid in terms of their moral principles, because they're clearly misguided, right? So, and I think of this as a very interesting objection because I think it fairly captures the difference between basing morality on moral principles, which we call deontology, and then basing morality on some standard of flexibility. Like we're really concerned about what the consequences are. And so sometimes we want to do the most optimal or maximal amount of goodness that we can in a situation. And that's not here. Kant is strictly on the point of morality has nothing to do with consequences, but it has everything to do with the reasons that people give themselves to act. And if those reasons are consistent with the rational principles of categorical imperatives, right, namely the principle of humanity and the principle of universalizability, then that's what morality is. It's giving ourselves reasons that find harmony or accord with the general rational moral principles that are out there. And Kant thinks that he's discovered them in those two principles, right? Here's an example of that lack of rigidity and flexibility objection. So when Huck Finn beats himself up for hiding his slave friend Jim and are lying to others about helping them down the Mississippi River, we admire Huck Finn's lack of integrity, right? Because, you know, the principles of slave owning South were not morally correct. So having integrity in the wrong type of situation doesn't really seem to help us, right? We admire him for breaking the rules and having the ability to lie when Jim's life is at stake, even though uh, Kant's system is very rigid and say that, you know, you can't universalize actually lying, yet we respect Huck Finn for doing so, right? So here's another objection. The principle of universalizability demands that we never make exceptions to ourselves, so much so that our actions are always intrinsically wrong. Kant thinks we should never tell lies at all, period, end of story, right? And so here's the case of the inquiring murderer. Kant has us imagine a man bent on killing another. The would-be killer knocks at your door and asks, where is the man he wants to kill? In this scenario, you do know where he is, right? So what should you do? Should you tell the man where he is? Because if you lie, you are basically acting immorally and therefore irrationally, right? Because when we lie to another human being, according to Kant, it's the type of thing that cannot be universalized at all. We can't make it a universal law that everyone lie, right? So what did Kant say? Ideally, you have two choices. You could say nothing and not help the murderer and no lying, which maybe is the way to go here, just not cooperate. But you also have a duty to always tell the truth. Now, Schaefer-Landau, who is the author of our ethics textbook, says Kant just misapplied his own theory, right? So when confronted with a potential killer, I might not adopt this maxim, say whatever I need to say in order to prevent the murder of an innocent person. This is universalizable, and I am aiming at to save an innocent life. So if everyone acted this way, so much the better. So I think that's an easy out, and it's an interesting strategy, but also maybe Kant's theory of morality is too formalistic, is too rigid and too uncompromising, right? Kant's theory never stated explicitly that moral duties are absolute, even though he's often interpreted as having implied that with the amount of emphasis he places on rationality and morality being the same thing. So even if moral duties outweigh other considerations, moral duties might be in competition with other moral duties. So it doesn't strictly follow follow that moral duties are always absolute when they can possibly conflict, right? Objections, I guess since I misnumbered them, I'll just say it here for the purposes of the video, right? So objections 2, 3, and 4, in some ways, they're unfair because Kantian ethics consists of both this principle of universalizability that we've gone over and the principle of humanity that we have not discussed. The principle of humanity would help in some instances of the cases of fanatics and integrity, and this will become more apparent as we move to the next chapter. So that's the objections to, and that's the other side of the video, right? And the other side of the chapter, right? So these are the objections. Hopefully you're getting a little bit of a taste of ethics in terms of like, in philosophy, we propose a thesis, we look at the reasons why someone thinks this way, and then we raise counter arguments and objections to test uh, the main theory or the main idea under discussion. And then we see like, can the perspective or idea, or in this case, can Kant evade these objections? And I think that he can, but I think that will become more clear when we do a video about the next chapter, right? So, and that's what I'm going to do. All right. Thank you for listening, and I appreciate you.